If you have ever been stuck in a really high conflict situation, I'm talking a divorce, a big dispute at work, even just a tense negotiation, the usual methods, they often fall flat.
Yeah, they sort of treat the symptoms, but they don't get to the disease.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So today we're doing a deep dive into this really revolutionary approach to conflict resolution called dynamic mediation, or DM.
And it is radical
Yeah.
because it completely stops treating conflict as, just a legal problem or a psychological one. It starts treating it as a dynamic system problem.
Right.
The sources you gave us, they use the language of cybernetics and systems thinking as the foundational operating manual for mediation.
And our mission here isn't just to, define a bunch of these terms that can sound pretty dense.
Mhm.
It's to really understand how this whole model transforms the mediator from a simple problem solver into more of a change manager.
It is. It's all about leveraging the dynamics of the whole system to get to a sustainable long-term equilibrium.
It feels like a shortcut to getting well-informed on how to manage these incredibly messy, high-variety disputes.
It's a total paradigm shift. It asks you to move away from that simple reductionist thinking and just embrace the incredible dynamics of conflict as a whole.
Okay, so to get where dynamic mediation is coming from, we kind of have to look at the field it's reacting against.
For sure.
Dispute resolution is just full of these different schools, facilitative, evaluative. But the biggest controversy, it really centers around something called transformative mediation, or TM.
Ah, yes. TM. That was championed by Bush and Folger, back in 1994?
That's the one.
And it made huge ripples because it basically rejected the goal that everyone else had, which was reaching a settlement.
Right.
Its focus was totally on internal shifts, this idea of fostering empowerment and recognition among the people in the dispute.
And while those two ideas sound great, I mean, who doesn't want empowerment and recognition?
Of course.
The sources point out that TM created some major gridlocks in the field. The first big critique sounds almost like, well, a fight in itself. TM was criticized for coming at other approaches from a moral high ground.
Oh, yeah, that's where that great quote from Conlon comes in. He's describing TM outcomes with this just biting sarcasm.
What was it again?
He said if dispute resolution theories were categorized by paint finish, TM would only be available in luminous transcendent gloss.
Wow. Okay, so it was a very charged debate.
Extremely.
But beyond the rhetoric, the sources pull out some serious structural criticism.
Oh, absolutely. One was that it used an extreme reductionist approach. It tried to limit this huge dynamic process of transformation to just those two elements.
It's just empowerment and recognition.
Just those two. And transformation is so much more involved than that. Then the second big concern was about blurring boundaries.
The pseudo-therapist idea.
Exactly. Critics were worried that mediators pushing for these really deep personal shifts might start acting like therapists, getting way outside their scope.
So if TM was focused on those ideas, empowerment and recognition, which are powerful, why couldn't dynamic mediation just integrate them? Why did it have to reject the whole system?
That is a crucial distinction. DM doesn't actually reject the concepts themselves. It rejects the reductionist mindset.
The idea that it's only those two things.
Right. DM's core belief is that mediation is, by its very nature, an interdisciplinary field.
You use the analogy of biochemistry and chemistry.
Precisely. Biochemistry borrows from biology and chemistry, but no one calls it pseudochemistry. DM borrows from law, from psychology, from systems thinking, because that's what the job requires. You need a multifaceted toolkit for a multifaceted problem.
So if we push past all these competing styles, what is the fundamental process that dynamic mediation defines for itself?
It defines mediation as, and this is the direct quote, a dynamic process in which the mediator facilitates, shapes, and directs the flow of information, meaning communication, between disputant parties negotiating to reach a sustainable agreement.
That word dynamic feels like the key. The mediator isn't just a passive facilitator. They are actively shaping the system's flow.
To create sustainability, yes, that's the goal.
Which leads us straight into cybernetics. Why do we need to use this kind of technical systems-based language to understand something as human as conflict?
Because the old ways look at isolated parts. He said, she said, or what's the legal angle here? Cybernetics gives us the language of control. It forces us to see the entire dispute as a whole system that's in motion.
And that lets you see where the real leverage points are.
Exactly.
Okay, let's build this toolkit. The first concept is the system.
And a system is really simple. It's just anything with connected parts. So in a conflict, the system includes the people, the topic they're fighting about, their history, their social connections, everything.
And what's interesting is that the mediator is the one who decides where to draw the line around that system.
That's the first act of control, defining the boundaries.
Okay, next up, equilibrium.
So equilibrium is just a state of rest where all the forces cancel out. But in a social system that's been disturbed by a conflict, well, it's in disequilibrium. It's out of balance.
And the sources say the only drive operating there is the urge to get back to a new normal.
A new, stable, sustainable normal. That's the pull toward a new equilibrium. It's relentless.
And the mechanism for getting there is control.
Right. Control is the attribute that allows a system to seek and maintain its equilibrium, to adapt to things it didn't see coming.
Okay, but does that mean the mediator is controlling the parties? Because that sounds like the exact opposite of empowerment.
That is a great question, and it needs some nuance. The mediator is not controlling the people.
Okay.
They are facilitating the conditions for the system itself to gain control. The mediator's job is to help the system become viable for the future, not to dictate an outcome to the individuals.
This brings us to what feels like the biggest theoretical hurdle for the mediator, which is managing variety. And variety is just the number of possible states a system can be in.
And here is where you hit the core of the problem. Think about a high-conflict divorce. You have two people, and each one has an exponentially high variety. Their moods, their beliefs, their memories, what they might do next.
And the combination of the two is just immense.
Immense variety. And this is where Ashby's law of requisite variety is so important. It says, only variety can destroy variety.
So in simple terms, the mediator has to be as complex as the fight they're trying to manage.
You got it. The mediator, as the control function, has to have enough capacity, enough tools, enough ways of framing the problem, enough variety to match and manage the sheer chaos the parties are throwing out. You need complexity to manage complexity.
Otherwise, the system just runs wild.
Completely wild.
That's a really powerful way of putting it. Now, before we get into the actual toolkit for managing all that variety, we have to clarify the language. Conflict versus dispute.
Yes, this distinction is critical in DM. Conflict is the internal state. It's that discomforting difference, that feeling or perception that your world is out of balance.
And a dispute is just a subset of that. It's the action you take on the outside to try and fix that internal discomfort.
Right. You can feel conflict, feel internal anxiety without ever having an outward dispute with someone.
So that conflict feeling emerges when you sense a deviation from your ideal state, your beliefs, your values. And the uncomfortable emotions that come with it, they aren't a bug, they're a feature.
They are the system's control response. They're pushing you toward a new equilibrium.
And we really only have two choices to get there.
Only two. We either try to change the outside world, which, creates a dispute, or we look inwards and change our own beliefs and values. And that internal shift is what DM defines as learning.
Moving from one equilibrium to the next.
Exactly.
And this is where it gets really fascinating because the source material brings up this baffling paradox of learning that mediators are always up against.
It's so deep, and it's rooted in our evolution. See, learning requires vulnerability. You have to accept that your current beliefs might be wrong and be willing to redefine them. But conflict, to the brain, is seen as a fundamental threat.
A threat. And when that internal control system senses a threat, it activates these ancient defense mechanisms designed for one thing: survival.
And those defenses, they suppress trust, they suppress our ability to take in new information, which actively inhibits learning.
Think about that. The very thing that creates the need for change, the conflict, also triggers the defensive response that prevents us from being able to change.
It's a fundamental human contradiction that the mediator somehow has to solve.
That is the entire job. Since disputes are settled in emotional contexts, not just logical ones, the mediator's core role is managing this paradox. They have to create an environment that feels safe enough to lower the perception of threat.
To disarm those defenses and allow people to open up to the possibility of change.
That's it.
So this brings us to the actual structure DM uses. The sources apply a classic business model. Kurt Lewin's 3 Steps to Mediation. That seems incredibly radical. It's radical because it really sees mediation as a controlled change management process. Lewin's model is like the treatment plan that follows our earlier diagnosis with cybernetics.
And the steps are unfreeze, Move, freeze.
Unfreeze, move, freeze.
Let's start with unfreeze. This is about getting past those defenses, getting the parties ready for change.
It actually starts before the mediation, with meticulous screening to figure out what the emotional triggers are. But the core technique in the room is to shift the parties immediately to defining their preferred future.
Their ideal equilibrium state. You have to get them to stop talking about the problem.
Yes, and this is where hope language comes in. Instead of asking, so what brought you here today, which just focuses on past pain.
You ask, what are your best hopes from this session?
And that tiny linguistic shift is immensely powerful. Remember those defenses? They're closed to incoming threats, but they're relatively open to output, to talking about their own hopes and desires.
So by making the conversation output-focused, the mediator uses hope to get around the resistance.
And move the system into that unfrozen state.
Okay, so once the system's unfrozen, we enter the move phase, co-creating the pathways forward. And the mediator has to fight every urge to just jump in and solve it for them.
Oh, absolutely. The mediator does not offer solutions. They facilitate discovery. They help the parties find their own resources, their own success stories. Maybe there were times the problem wasn't there, or little things they did that actually worked.
And you leverage those strengths so they can build their own way forward.
Co-construct it, yes.
And to keep things moving and measure progress, DM uses this really clever evaluation technique, a rating scale.
Yes. You have the parties rate where they are now against their desired future, which is a 10. So let's say they rate themselves at a 3.
Good.
That number is incredibly useful. First, it validates the small progress that got them to a 3 in the first place. Second, it anchors them in reality. But most importantly, it shifts the focus away from this huge, overwhelming target, the 10 to the very next tangible step.
So instead of trying to figure out how to get all the way to 10, the question becomes,
what tiny move gets you from a 3 to a 4?
that feels so much more achievable.
It makes progress tangible and immediate, and it keeps the momentum going through the move phase.
Finally, we get to freeze. This is all about making sure the agreement is sustainable. It's a reminder that getting a signature isn't the real goal.
The key here is to simulate implementation. The mediator has to rigorously stress test the agreement against real-world chaos.
Now, what does that look like? Give us an example.
Okay, so if the agreement is about a child pickup schedule, you don't just write Thursday at 5 p.m. You ask, what happens if on Thursday there's a huge traffic jam and you can't get there in time? What's the communication loop? Who's the backup?
So you verify every single step and plan for things to go wrong.
You proactively control for future variety. And critically, you have to build feedback loops.
Mechanisms to deal with future problems.
Precisely. Because change is inevitable, the system needs its own internal ways to handle future challenges. These feedback loops are what make the system viable long after the mediator is gone.
This level of complexity explains why you need a special tool to manage it all. Dynamic system modeling, or DSM, this is the visual part, right? It promotes collective learning.
It's the mediator's high variety tool. DSM visually untangles all that complexity by defining the core variables and then illustrating the causal links between them.
Cause and effect.
Right. And the link just follows a simple rule. If variable A goes up, does variable B go up, which is a plus sign, or does it go down, a minus sign?
And this visual, step-by-step process is also how you manage those defensive interruptions we talked about earlier.
Absolutely. High conflict parties, they're always interrupting to defend themselves. So the mediator draws the model on a whiteboard, one causal link at a time. If someone interrupts, the mediator just makes a quick note, visually parks the comment, and says, we'll get back to that.
So you're showing them you're hearing everything, but you're slowing the process down so learning can actually happen.
You're preventing reactivity from blocking the learning process.
Let's use that example from the sources. The dispute between Lindsay and Jeremy over chores.
Right. So on the surface, it's simple. Jeremy isn't helping enough, so Lindsay's stress is going up. The mediator models that link. Jeremy helping gets a minus sign to household chores. More help, fewer chores.
But the real power is in uncovering what's underneath that.
The mediator has to ask the questions to find out what that link really means. So they ask Lindsay, what does it mean to you when Jeremy helps out?
And she might say something like, it shows that he cares.
Which strengthens the foundation of our family. And then the mediator adds those positive dynamics to the model right there on the board for everyone to see.
And all of a sudden, the visual model shows them it's not about dirty dishes. It's a positive feedback loop. More help means more caring, which means a stronger family, which actually encourages Jeremy to help more.
It completely shifts the focus from blaming to shared goals. By visually mapping how a change benefits the whole system, it forces them both to see they have to take responsibility for the problem and the solution.
They stop seeing it as my problem and your problem and start seeing it as our system.
Ex-
This whole deep dive just reinforces this idea that dynamic mediation is a transformation specialist approach. The mediator isn't a judge or a therapist. They're a change manager.
A dedicated change manager constantly controlling and facilitating a dynamic system toward a new, shared equilibrium.
It's holistic, it's deeply practical, but it's also rooted in this understanding that conflict is just part of being human.
It is. But if we take one final provocative idea from the sources, it's this. No learning system, any social system, can stay in equilibrium for long.
So, change is inevitable. Equilibrium is always temporary. What does that mean for you, the listener, now that you understand this cybernetic approach?
It means adopting this mindset isn't just about putting out the current fire. It's about preparing yourself to perpetually manage the inevitable change and the future conflicts that will come. The real success of DM is building those feedback loops and fostering viability, the system's ability to manage its own future challenges long after the mediator leaves. It's about learning to surf the waves of change, not just survive the storm.